The rain was falling in sheets over London the night the whispers began to spread, not among common gossip circles, but within the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace itself. There was talk of a fracture so deep that it threatened to split the monarchy in two, and at the center of it stood a little girl whose life had barely begun. Princess Charlotte, innocent yet unavoidably tied to centuries of tradition, had become the unwitting catalyst in a clash between two towering forces of the royal household: Prince William, future king and protective father, and Queen Camilla, a woman whose rise to power had always been shadowed by controversy. The story that unfolds from this moment is not just about family. It is about legacy, betrayal, and a decision so heavy it carried the weight of the crown itself. The beginning of this saga can be traced back not to Charlotte's smile on public balconies or her confident wave at grand parades, but rather to the quiet corridors of the palace, where loyalties are tested and ambitions revealed in whispers behind closed doors. Queen Camilla, long a figure of resilience and reinvention, had never fully escaped the judgment of the public or even of her own stepson. Her relationship with William had been complex, sometimes polite and ceremonial, sometimes cold and strained. Yet what ignited the current firestorm was not an old grudge but a new affront: Camilla's insistence on thrusting her grandson, Gus Lopes, into the orbit of Princess Charlotte in ways that William believed overstepped boundaries no one, not even a queen consort, should dare to cross. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What made William's blood run cold was not just the act itself, but the symbolism. For a man who had sworn to protect his children from the traumas he and his brother endured, the idea of his daughter being pressured, manipulated, or even treated as a pawn for royal politics struck like a dagger. Those who know William describe him as calm in public, but fierce in private when his family is threatened. And so, when Camilla allegedly forced an encounter between Charlotte and Gus Lopes, ignoring Charlotte's discomfort and disregarding Catherine's protective instincts, William saw not just a grandmother trying to blend families, but a queen consort who had forgotten her place. The storm had begun to gather, and William was no longer willing to stand silently in the rain. The middle of this tale is one of mounting tension, where every gesture became a signal and every silence a weapon. Behind the grandeur of royal ceremonies, the family was engaged in an invisible battle. At garden parties, observers noticed William's jaw tightening whenever Camilla approached Charlotte. At dinners, Catherine's hands lingered on her daughter's shoulders as if to shield her from some unseen force. And all the while, Camilla, proud and stubborn, carried herself with the authority of her title, perhaps believing that the crown gave her rights over every child who bore the Windsor bloodline. It was this assumption that William could not abide. To him, being king one day meant above all else being the guardian of the future, and Charlotte, with her bright eyes and sharp mind, was that future incarnate. The media, always circling like vultures around palace drama, began to catch hints of the discord. Though no headlines named Charlotte directly, whispers about a clash of households and growing tension between the Prince of Wales and Queen Camilla began to leak. Royal commentators speculated endlessly, but none could pinpoint the heart of the conflict. Few outside the family understood the gravity of the matter. This was not a spat about precedence or titles. It was about the sanctity of a child's dignity. For William, no compromise was possible. For Camilla, retreat would have meant humiliation. And so, the collision course was set, unstoppable and irreversible. It was within William's private study at Kensington Palace, late one night, that the decisive moment took shape. The room was quiet save for the ticking of an antique clock, a relic of his grandmother's reign. He sat surrounded by papers, letters from advisors, legal opinions on the scope of his authority. Catherine entered briefly, her face calm, but her eyes searching. She didn't need to speak. William already knew her heart. Protect Charlotte, whatever it takes. That silent plea resonated louder than any royal decree, and in that moment William understood the path he had to take, even if it meant igniting a storm that would alter the monarchy forever. To stand idle would mean failing his daughter. To act would mean rewriting history. The climax of the introduction lies not in the finality of the decision, but in the heaviness of its anticipation. Imagine the weight of a son stripping the woman his father loved of the crown she fought to claim. Imagine the world watching, the press dissecting every glance, every phrase, every photograph. Imagine the fury of Camilla, a woman who endured decades of vilification, only to be cast aside not by the public this time, but by her own stepson. And then imagine Charlotte, blissfully unaware of the political war swirling around her, holding her mother's hand, the picture of innocence that had forced an empire to confront its conscience. As the introduction draws to its end, the viewer is left standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into a story that is both intimate and monumental. William's decision was not yet public, but the ripples had already begun. The court was buzzing, the advisors divided, the king caught between wife and son. All of Britain was unknowingly perched on the brink of a revelation that would test their faith in the crown once again. The monarchy, an institution that has weathered abdications, divorces, scandals, and tragedies, was now facing a crisis born not of politics or policy, but of family. And in the middle of it all stood a little girl, her father's fierce love, and a queen consort whose ambition collided with the wrong prince. The beginning has given you the question: how far will a father go to protect his child, when that child also carries the weight of a kingdom? The middle has revealed the rising tide of conflict, the battle of wills behind the gilded doors. And the end of this introduction leaves you with a promise. The story you are about to hear is not just about titles and crowns. It is about power and love, betrayal and redemption, the very essence of monarchy itself. When William finally makes his move, when the fatal decision is declared, the monarchy will never be the same. Every monarchy thrives on the illusion of perfection, on the carefully woven tapestry that convinces the world of stability, grace, and continuity. The British royal family has long been the ultimate master of this art, staging weddings, jubilees, and grand ceremonies that project the image of a fairy tale kingdom. But like every storybook castle, there are cracks beneath the gilded surface. In this first chapter, we step back to see how the tale of Queen Camilla as consort was not one of seamless romance, but of relentless struggle, how her presence in the royal family was accepted by duty rather than embraced by destiny, and how those unresolved tensions set the stage for a devastating clash with the future king. When Queen Elizabeth II passed, her final act of blessing Camilla as queen consort was seen by many as a gesture of peace. After decades of suspicion and outright hostility from the public, Camilla had finally reached the pinnacle she had once been denied. The day Charles placed the crown on his head, Camilla stood beside him with her own, a symbol of perseverance and an undeniable statement of legitimacy. Yet, not everyone was at ease with this arrangement. The wounds of Diana's memory still lingered, especially in the hearts of her sons. Prince William, though outwardly courteous, had never been entirely reconciled to the idea that the woman who had once been seen as the wedge in his parents' marriage was now elevated to the highest female role in the monarchy. His politeness masked a profound unease, one that Catherine noticed in private moments when his smile faltered or his tone grew clipped whenever Camilla's name arose. This was the backdrop against which Charlotte was growing up, a royal child adored by her parents, admired by the public, and viewed by many as the very embodiment of hope for the next generation of Windsors. Charlotte's presence at public events charmed the nation, her playful gestures and confident demeanor contrasting with the weight of her future responsibilities. She was still a child, but already, she symbolized continuity. For William, Charlotte was not just a daughter. She was the future of the monarchy he would inherit. That meant her innocence had to be protected at all costs, her experiences carefully shielded from the suffocating pressures of palace life. But Camilla's rise to queen consort blurred the boundaries. In her mind, her own family, her children from her first marriage, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez, and her grandchildren, were now part of the royal sphere. The crown, once distant from them, had become a shared stage. It was within this vision that she began drawing Charlotte into interactions with her grandson, Gus Lopes. On the surface, this might have seemed harmless. After all, families intertwine, children play, and bonds are forged. But in the context of the monarchy, nothing is ever so simple. To William, it was not a matter of playdates or family mingling. It was a question of influence, of control, of where Camilla's reach began and where it ended. This is where the fairy tale began to fracture. In official photographs, the family appeared united. William and Catherine stood gracefully beside Charles and Camilla at state functions. Charlotte smiled dutifully, waving to the cameras. Yet behind the scenes, small gestures told a different story. William's eyes lingered longer when Camilla leaned toward Charlotte. Catherine positioned herself subtly between her daughter and Camilla's family. These protective instincts, though discreet, were the visible signs of deeper currents of mistrust. To those who watched carefully, it was evident that the Prince and Princess of Wales were not entirely comfortable with the Queen Consort's attempts to merge her personal family with theirs. The palace itself was no stranger to divided households. History is littered with tales of rivalries between heirs and consorts, between reigning monarchs and their children. The Tudor court had seen Henry VIII's queens sparring with the children of previous marriages. Queen Victoria had once been at odds with her own heirs over issues of influence. And so, this was not unprecedented. But in William's eyes, the matter was not about precedent. It was about Charlotte. He had watched his mother suffer, watched her dignity stripped away by an institution that failed to protect her. He had vowed that no such fate would befall his children. And now, he was watching as Charlotte became the centerpiece of a struggle he had not sought but could not ignore. Public opinion only heightened the tension. While many Britons had grown to accept Camilla, some never fully warmed to her. Every move she made was still scrutinized with suspicion by a segment of the population. William, on the other hand, enjoyed nearly universal respect as the steady, dependable heir. His family with Catherine had been painted as the epitome of modern monarchy, grounded, relatable, and deeply protective of their children's privacy. The contrast could not have been sharper. When the whispers began that Camilla was perhaps too forceful in her dealings with Charlotte, the public instinctively leaned toward William's side, even before they knew the details. The fairy tale of a united royal family was unraveling, and the cracks were showing for the world to see. Charlotte herself, though a child, was perceptive. Children have an uncanny ability to sense tension, to pick up on unease even when words are carefully chosen. On outings where she was expected to spend time with Gus Lopes, her hesitance was noticed by her parents. Catherine in particular read the signs. The way Charlotte would retreat closer to her side, the slight frown that replaced her usual confident smile, the reluctance to engage in activities that seemed to have been orchestrated more for appearances than for her comfort. To Catherine, this was intolerable. To William, it was infuriating. But to Camilla, it was nothing more than natural adjustment within a blended royal family. The gap between perception and reality was widening, and it was only a matter of time before the fragile peace shattered completely. The fairy tale of Camilla's redemption, her transformation from the most vilified woman in Britain to queen consort, was supposed to be the closing of a painful chapter in royal history. But William's story with her was not finished. For him, the past could not simply be rewritten with a crown and a title. His loyalty lay not with a stepmother he had never fully embraced, but with the children who depended on him. And as he watched Charlotte being nudged into roles she did not choose, with a boy she did not know well, he felt the weight of every promise he had made silently to Diana's memory. Never again would a child of his be sacrificed to the machinery of the monarchy. By the end of this first chapter, what remains clear is that the fairy tale was never truly whole. The cracks that once seemed minor had widened into fissures. The images of unity were only an illusion, hiding the truth of a family divided by mistrust. The seeds of conflict had been planted, and they would soon grow into a storm that no title, no ceremony, no carefully staged photograph could contain. For William, the fairy tale had shattered long ago, and now he was left to decide whether to pick up the broken pieces or to forge something entirely new. That decision, as the next chapters will show, would prove fatal not to him, but to the queen consort who believed she had finally secured her place at the heart of the monarchy. The tensions that erupted between Prince William and Queen Camilla did not materialize out of thin air. They were sown gradually, like seeds planted deep in the soil of unresolved grievances and unspoken truths, watered over the years by suspicion, subtle slights, and the constant weight of royal duty. To understand why the confrontation over Princess Charlotte and Gus Lopes became the breaking point, we must trace the roots of mistrust that ran deep between the Prince of Wales and his stepmother. It is here that the story takes on its layered complexity, a web of emotions, histories, and political realities that could never be neatly separated. William had grown up in a household defined by contradiction. On the one hand, he was raised to embody stability and dignity, the heir apparent whose every move was a rehearsal for kingship. On the other, he was the child of one of the most turbulent marriages in modern royal history. The images of his mother crying, of paparazzi chasing her, of his father's aloofness, of Camilla's looming presence even when she wasn't physically in the room. All of these memories clung to William like shadows. By the time he reached adulthood, William had learned to mask his feelings in public, but those who knew him best understood that the scars remained. And central to those scars was the figure of Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman whose name had once been whispered with disdain in every corner of the British press. Camilla herself had never sought William's approval in the early days. She understood that his acceptance of her role would be slow, if it came at all. She maintained politeness, sometimes even warmth, but she never pushed too far, perhaps knowing that the boys would forever see her through the lens of their mother's suffering. But when Charles became king and she ascended as queen consort, the dynamic shifted. No longer was she simply Camilla, tolerated but never embraced. She was now Her Majesty, carrying the full weight of the crown. That shift, subtle in formality but enormous in meaning, reignited all the old embers of mistrust that William had tried to keep buried. He could accept her as his father's partner. Accepting her as queen consort was something altogether different. The seeds of tension between them began to show in the smallest of details. At public events, Camilla would sometimes attempt to direct conversations with Charlotte, George, and Louis, stepping into the role of grandmotherly figure with an authority that seemed too deliberate. William noticed. He noted, too, the way she occasionally invoked her own family's presence at royal gatherings. Her children, Tom and Laura, and her grandchildren, including Gus Lopes. In her mind, it was natural to blend the two families. In William's mind, it was a step too far, as though she were attempting to graft her lineage onto a dynasty that was not hers to claim. One of the earliest visible signs of this quiet struggle came during a family gathering where Charlotte and Gus were photographed side by side. On the surface, it appeared innocent enough, two children smiling at a formal event. But behind the scenes, Catherine was uneasy. She had noticed Camilla's insistence on placing the two together, framing the image as though to say, "Our families are one." For William, it felt manipulative, a way to rewrite history by placing her bloodline beside the future of the crown. The photograph itself sparked little comment publicly, but within palace walls, it deepened William's distrust. To him, it was a symbolic encroachment, the subtle but unmistakable suggestion that Camilla's descendants had a place in the future of the monarchy. They did not. It is important to understand that William was not acting out of petty resentment. His concern was rooted in something deeper, the preservation of the monarchy's moral authority. He had spent years shaping a modern vision of kingship, transparent, empathetic, protective of family. His marriage to Catherine had become the cornerstone of this vision, projecting stability in a world of uncertainty. His children were not just his family. They were symbols of the monarchy's future survival. And so, when Camilla's actions seemed to blur the lines between her personal family and the royal heirs, William saw a threat not just to Charlotte's well-being, but to the very structure of the institution he was destined to lead. The seeds of tension were further nourished by the media. The British tabloids had long been divided on Camilla's image. While some had softened in their portrayal of her after years of rehabilitation, others never forgave her past role in the disintegration of Charles and Diana's marriage. Whenever Camilla was photographed near Charlotte, the speculation began. Was she overstepping? Was she trying to assert her influence over the future queen? Was William quietly fuming? Every glance was dissected, every gesture turned into fodder for speculation. For a man who prized his children's privacy, this intrusion was intolerable, and it only deepened his suspicion that Camilla was putting Charlotte in positions that fed the media machine. Another moment that added to the growing unease came at a summer garden party hosted at Buckingham Palace. Witnesses recalled an awkward moment when Camilla tried to usher Charlotte toward Gus for a photograph, while Charlotte hesitated and clung to her mother's hand. Catherine, gentle but firm, declined, steering Charlotte away. Camilla smiled for the cameras, but William's expression darkened. Those who saw it described his look as thunderous. It was a small moment, easily overlooked in the broader festivities, but for William it was confirmation of what he feared. Camilla was willing to ignore Charlotte's discomfort to serve her own narrative. That moment lingered in his mind long after the party ended. It was not just about photographs or playdates. The tension was philosophical, almost existential. William believed the monarchy's survival hinged on transparency, relatability, and moral credibility. Camilla, forged in the traditions of an older, more insular court, believed survival came from asserting authority, from projecting unity regardless of personal feelings. These two visions clashed every time Charlotte was pushed into Camilla's world. For William, protecting his daughter meant protecting the monarchy's credibility. For Camilla, including her grandchildren meant solidifying her place in the dynasty. The two were on a collision course, and neither could yield without losing something essential to their identity. Even Charles could not remain oblivious to the growing unease. He, too, noticed the coolness between his son and his wife. He heard the reports from staff about awkward silences and tense conversations. He tried, in his way, to mediate, urging William to see Camilla's intentions as benign. But William was not convinced. He remembered too well the pain his mother endured when boundaries were ignored. He was determined not to let history repeat itself, not for Charlotte, not for any of his children. And in this determination, he grew less and less willing to compromise. What began as seeds of tension were now taking root, growing into something larger and more dangerous. By the time Charlotte was old enough to begin attending more official events, the stage was already set. Every time she stood beside Gus, every time Camilla tried to fold her into the tapestry of her own family, the tension grew thicker. It was as though two visions of the monarchy were being played out through the lives of children. On one side, the future king, determined to guard the dignity of his daughter. On the other, the queen consort, determined to assert her own family's place in history. Both believed they were right. Both believed they were serving the monarchy. And both were blind to the fact that their collision would eventually tear open the illusion of harmony for the world to see. The seeds had been planted long ago, in the soil of Diana's heartbreak, in the bitterness of divorce, in the decades of public skepticism. By the time they sprouted into the controversy over Charlotte and Gus, they were no longer seeds at all. They were vines, twisting, growing, threatening to strangle the unity of the royal family itself. The fairy tale was gone, and what remained was a battle of wills that could only end in one way, with a decision so severe that it would change the monarchy forever. Every long-simmering conflict eventually finds its flashpoint, that one event which crystallizes all the hidden resentments and unspoken fears into a single undeniable reality. For Prince William and Queen Camilla, that moment came not in a grand hall or at a glittering banquet, but in an encounter that seemed almost ordinary on the surface. Yet beneath its surface, it carried the weight of history and the spark of confrontation. The incident that placed Princess Charlotte in the spotlight was the culmination of years of unease, and it became the final straw for a father who had sworn that no one, not even a queen, would have the power to compromise his daughter's dignity. It happened during what was meant to be a quiet family gathering. Charles and Camilla had organized a weekend retreat, a carefully choreographed event meant to project unity and domestic warmth to the outside world. On the guest list were not only senior royals, but also Camilla's children and grandchildren. The plan, as palace insiders would later reveal, was to stage moments of togetherness that could be photographed and released to the public, reinforcing the image of a blended family at ease with itself. For Camilla, this was an opportunity to weave her grandchildren into the fabric of the monarchy. For William, it was a situation fraught with danger. He and Catherine had debated whether to attend at all, but duty required their presence. And so, they arrived with George, Charlotte, and Louis, determined to smile through what they already sensed would be an uncomfortable weekend. The tension was palpable from the start. At meals, Camilla would steer conversations toward her family, introducing anecdotes about her grandchildren in ways that drew subtle comparisons to William's children. At one lunch, she recounted a story of Gus's sporting achievements, pointedly noting how the boy had a competitive streak that reminded her of royal blood. Catherine smiled politely, but beneath the table, William's hands tightened around his fork. To him, it was another attempt to blur lines, to suggest connections where none existed. But he kept his silence, saving his words for Catherine later in private, where his frustration poured out in guarded whispers. The incident itself came later that afternoon during a casual outdoor gathering. The children were ushered into the gardens, where photographers had been discreetly stationed to capture moments of play. It was all meant to look spontaneous, but every detail had been planned. At one point, Camilla encouraged Charlotte to sit with Gus for a series of posed photographs. Charlotte, shy and hesitant, refused at first. She looked to her mother, seeking reassurance, and Catherine gently shook her head, signaling that she didn't need to comply. But Camilla, smiling for the cameras, persisted. She placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder and nudged her forward. The cameras clicked, capturing an image of a little girl clearly uncomfortable, forced into a tableau she did not choose. That single gesture became the spark. Witnesses described William's reaction as immediate and explosive, though controlled in its outward expression. His face hardened, his jaw set, and his eyes fixed on Camilla with a fury that only Catherine, standing at his side, fully recognized. He stepped forward, gently pulling Charlotte back toward him, and whispered firmly to her, "You don't have to." The photographers, sensing the tension, snapped furiously, but William's body language shielded his daughter. The moment lasted only seconds, but in those seconds, a line had been crossed. What William saw was not a grandmother encouraging family bonding. What he saw was the queen consort using his daughter as a prop, disregarding her discomfort to stage an image that served her own narrative. For him, that was intolerable. The fallout was immediate behind the scenes. As the children were led away, William confronted Camilla in private. Accounts vary as to the exact words exchanged, but multiple insiders recall that William's tone was sharp and unyielding. He accused Camilla of overstepping, of ignoring Charlotte's feelings, of treating his daughter as though she were a pawn in a larger game. Camilla, for her part, defended herself. She insisted she was simply trying to foster family unity, that the photographs were harmless, that Charlotte would one day understand the importance of appearances. But to William, the explanation only deepened the wound. Appearances, he reminded her, had destroyed his mother. He would not let them destroy his daughter. The argument reverberated through the household. Staff whispered about the confrontation, noting how William left the room visibly shaken, while Camilla emerged pale but defiant. Catherine comforted Charlotte, who had sensed the tension but did not fully understand its meaning. The other children, George and Louis, were shielded from the drama, though they too picked up on the unease that hung over the remainder of the retreat. Charles, caught in the middle, attempted to smooth things over, urging calm and discretion. But the damage had been done. For William, there was no going back. The incident had crystallized his belief that Camilla's influence was a danger not only to Charlotte, but to the moral core of the monarchy. In the days that followed, the media began to circulate carefully curated photographs from the retreat. Among them were the images of Charlotte and Gus, smiling stiffly side by side. To the casual observer, they seemed benign. But those who looked closely noticed Charlotte's discomfort, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her smile did not quite reach her eyes. Social media users picked up on it quickly, commenting that the little princess appeared uneasy, that the scene felt staged. The palace declined to comment, but the whispers grew louder. Was there tension between William and Camilla? Was Charlotte being pushed into roles she didn't want? The questions multiplied, and though the answers remained hidden, the sense of unease spread like wildfire. For William, the incident became a turning point. He replayed it in his mind countless times, each time feeling the same surge of anger and resolve. He confided in Catherine, admitting that he no longer trusted Camilla's judgment. He spoke to close advisors, weighing the risks of taking a stand. And in private, he began to contemplate the unthinkable, stripping Camilla of the title that had been so controversially bestowed upon her. It was a decision that would shake the monarchy to its core, but William was no longer thinking as a statesman. He was thinking as a father, and fathers do not forgive those who harm their children. The incident also had a profound impact on Catherine. She had long been the quiet strength behind William, the steady presence who tempered his emotions with calm reasoning. But in this case, she shared his fury. To her, Charlotte's discomfort was not a trivial matter. It was a violation of the trust they had worked so hard to build with their children, a reminder that palace politics could intrude even into the most personal aspects of their lives. Catherine stood firmly beside William, urging him to do whatever was necessary to protect Charlotte. Her support gave him the confidence to move forward, even as the enormity of his decision loomed before him. The public, though unaware of the full details, sensed that something had shifted. Commentators noted the increasingly cool demeanor between William and Camilla at subsequent events. Body language experts dissected their interactions, pointing out the lack of warmth, the avoidance of eye contact, the subtle distancing. Royal watchers speculated about a rift, though few guessed the true depth of the conflict. Only those inside the palace understood that the seeds planted years ago had now blossomed into full confrontation, with no easy resolution in sight. By the end of this chapter, the incident that sparked it all had done more than create a temporary rift. It had laid bare the fundamental incompatibility between William's vision of the monarchy and Camilla's role within it. For William, the monarchy's future rested on protecting his children, not exploiting them. For Camilla, her legitimacy depended on weaving her family into the royal fabric, even if it meant blurring lines. The two visions could not coexist. And so, with Charlotte's discomfort as the catalyst, William began to chart a course toward a decision that would alter the monarchy forever. What began as an ordinary family gathering had become the turning point in a battle that would soon erupt into the open, with consequences neither side could fully control. Every man, no matter how disciplined or dutiful, has a limit. For Prince William, that limit was reached not in some sudden explosion of rage, but in a slow, grinding erosion of patience that finally collapsed under the weight of Camilla's overreach. The incident with Charlotte had struck him like a thunderclap, but the reverberations afterward were even more devastating. He had always known that palace life demanded compromise, that family dynamics within the monarchy could never be as simple as those within ordinary households. Yet when it came to his children, there was no room for negotiation. Camilla had crossed the line, and William knew deep down that he could never allow it to happen again. This was his breaking point, the moment where the protective father outweighed the cautious heir, where love for his daughter outweighed centuries of protocol. After the confrontation at the family retreat, William withdrew from Camilla in ways that were impossible not to notice. Courtiers spoke of frosty silences during meetings, of William arriving late to engagements where Camilla was present, of his subtle but unmistakable refusal to stand beside her for longer than protocol required. Catherine, ever watchful, saw the storm gathering behind her husband's eyes. She knew him well enough to recognize that this was no temporary anger. This was the kind of wound that festered, that demanded resolution. Late at night in Kensington Palace, after the children had been put to bed, she would find him pacing their sitting room, his mind restless, his heart torn. He would speak in fragments, sometimes of his mother, sometimes of Charlotte, sometimes of the monarchy itself. "It's happening again," he confessed one evening, his voice heavy with memory. "They used her. They'll use Charlotte if I don't stop it." The image of Diana's suffering haunted him. He remembered her sitting with him, explaining that sometimes the institution demanded sacrifices she was not willing to make. He remembered the hollow look in her eyes after media onslaughts she could not escape. Most of all, he remembered the helplessness of being a child watching his mother crumble under a system that claimed to serve but often destroyed. Those memories had shaped William into the man he became. A fiercely protective parent, cautious of the media, reluctant to expose his children to the machinery of the crown. Now, with Charlotte caught in Camilla's grasp, those memories surged back with brutal force. He could not allow his daughter to endure even a fragment of what his mother had endured. At this breaking point, William began to seek counsel. He spoke privately with advisors who had served the monarchy for decades, men and women who knew the intricacies of titles, precedents, and constitutional law. What were his options, he asked. Could a queen consort's title be stripped if it was deemed harmful to the crown's credibility? The answers he received were cautious, measured, filled with legal jargon and historical precedent. Yes, it was possible, though rare. Yes, it would cause scandal. Yes, it would likely divide the family. But as the discussions went on, William's conviction only deepened. The very fact that it was possible meant it was within his power. And if it was within his power, then it was within his responsibility. If not me, he told one confidant, then who? Who will protect her if I don't? Catherine's role during this time was crucial. She became William's anchor, the voice that steadied him when the weight of his thoughts grew too heavy. Though she never pushed him, she never dissuaded him either. She listened. She reminded him of Charlotte's worth, of the children's need for a safe and unpressured upbringing. She also reminded him of the stakes. To strip Camilla of her title would not be a private matter. It would explode across the media, dominate headlines for months, perhaps years. It would pit him against his father in the most public of ways. But Catherine also knew that William could not live with himself if he ignored the violation of his daughter's dignity. In the quiet moments, when they sat together in their private garden, she would take his hand and say only, "Do what you must, but do it for her." The breaking point was also visible in William's demeanor during public engagements. Observers noticed that his once measured calmness had taken on an edge. At events where Camilla was present, his body language was rigid, his expressions cool. At one state banquet, when Camilla attempted to make a light-hearted comment about Charlotte to those at the table, William's face did not so much as flicker. Cameras caught the moment, and though most of the public dismissed it as an ordinary silence, those who knew the deeper story saw it as a crack in the royal mask. William's patience was gone, and his resolve was hardening. The palace staff, often the first to sense shifts within the family, whispered of a household in turmoil. Some sided quietly with William, sympathizing with his desire to protect his children. Others feared the consequences of his determination. "He is his mother's son," one aide remarked. "He carries her fire, but he hides it until it bursts." Those words proved prophetic, for William's breaking point was not merely about Charlotte or Camilla. It was about the unresolved pain of Diana's legacy colliding with the reality of Camilla's reign. It was about a man torn between filial duty to his father and paternal duty to his daughter. And in the end, only one duty could win. In the days that followed his confrontation with Camilla, William began to distance himself from his father as well. Charles, who had tried to mediate with soft words and gentle reasoning, found himself facing a son who would not yield. In private meetings, Charles appealed to William's sense of duty, reminding him of the crown's stability, of the risks of division. But William's responses were curt. "What stability is there," he asked, "when we sacrifice our children for the sake of appearances?" Charles, torn between his wife and his son, had no answer. The silence between them grew colder, a silence filled with disappointment, love, and inevitability. What made William's breaking point so decisive was not merely anger, it was clarity. For years he had tolerated, endured, even smiled for the sake of unity. But now he saw with unflinching certainty that unity built on the discomfort of his daughter was no unity at all. He saw that his mother's fate would repeat itself if he did not intervene. And he saw that the monarchy's survival depended not on crowns or titles, but on trust. If the people could no longer trust that the monarchy would protect its own children, then what purpose did it serve? This clarity came at a price. William knew that to act against Camilla would be to tear open old wounds, to invite comparisons to the past, to risk alienating parts of the public who had finally accepted her. He knew that it would cause strain with his father, perhaps irreparable. He knew that it would be seen not just as a personal decision, but as a political one, a recalibration of power within the monarchy. And yet, he could not look at Charlotte without feeling the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. Every time she laughed, every time she held his hand, every time she looked to him for protection, he felt the decision tightening around him like a vice. He had no choice. The breaking point had been reached, and now there was no turning back. By the end of this chapter, William stands on the precipice of action. His patience exhausted, his trust in Camilla shattered, his determination unshakable. He is ready to do what no heir has done before, to challenge the legitimacy of a queen consort. It is a decision that will ignite scandal, fracture the monarchy, and redefine his relationship with his father. But in William's eyes, it is not a decision at all. It is a necessity, born of love for his daughter and of a vow made long ago at the grave of his mother. The breaking point has arrived, and the storm is about to break with it. In the swirl of royal drama, where every word is weighed and every action dissected, Catherine often remains the quiet presence in the background. Yet those who watch closely understand that her silence is not passivity, it is power. She has mastered the art of influence without spectacle, of strength without noise. When the storm between William and Camilla reached its height, Catherine did not make speeches or issue ultimatums. She did something far more effective. She stood beside her husband and her children with unwavering steadiness, shaping decisions not through confrontation but through calm certainty. In this chapter, Catherine emerges not as a bystander, but as the invisible force guiding William through the darkest chapter of his struggle with Camilla. From the beginning, Catherine understood the stakes in ways few others could. As a mother, she felt every tremor of Charlotte's unease. She noticed details that others might overlook. The slight tremble in her daughter's hand when pushed toward Gus, the way her eyes darted nervously toward her parents when Camilla leaned too close, the forced smiles that betrayed inner reluctance. Catherine carried those images with her like scars, silent reminders that her daughter's innocence was fragile, that the monarchy could intrude upon it at any moment. To her, protecting Charlotte was not just a matter of maternal instinct. It was a moral obligation, a line she could never allow anyone to cross. In private conversations with William, Catherine became both confidant and compass. She listened as he vented his anger, as he wrestled with the impossible choice between loyalty to his father and protection of his child. Where others might have urged caution, Catherine gave him space to speak without judgment. She did not fan the flames of his anger, but neither did she dismiss it. Instead, she reminded him of the bigger picture, of the family they had built together, of the promise they had made to raise their children with as much normalcy and dignity as possible. "We cannot control what the crown demands," she once told him, "but we can control what we allow for them." It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of conviction. For William, it was the reassurance he needed, that his instincts to protect Charlotte were not only justified but essential. Catherine's influence extended beyond private counsel. In subtle ways, she began to assert herself more visibly in public settings, always in the name of shielding her children. At royal events, she positioned herself strategically between Charlotte and Camilla, her posture gentle but firm, her body language an unspoken barrier. Photographs captured these moments. Catherine's protective hand on Charlotte's shoulder, her calm but watchful gaze as Camilla approached. To outsiders, it appeared natural, even maternal. To those within the family, it was unmistakable. Catherine was drawing boundaries, and she was doing so with quiet defiance. No one could accuse her of open rebellion, yet her actions spoke volumes. Her strength also manifested in the way she managed the children's environment. Catherine had long insisted on a balance between public duty and private life for George, Charlotte, and Louis. She fought for their right to attend school as normally as possible, to have playdates outside palace walls, to grow up with friends who were not burdened by titles. In the wake of the incident with Camilla, she became even more vigilant. Invitations that might place Charlotte in Camilla's orbit were politely declined. Appearances where Charlotte might be pushed into uncomfortable situations were carefully monitored. It was Catherine's way of reclaiming control, of ensuring that her daughter's life would not be dictated by the queen consort's ambitions. What made Catherine's strength so remarkable was its quietness. She did not need to raise her voice or confront Camilla directly. Her very presence, calm and composed, was a statement in itself. She embodied a new vision of royalty, one rooted in empathy, motherhood, and restraint. Where Camilla projected authority through status, Catherine projected it through authenticity. The public sensed this difference instinctively. Polls consistently showed that Catherine was one of the most trusted and beloved members of the royal family. Every time she appeared with Charlotte, smiling warmly and shielding her with subtle gestures of affection, the public's sympathy for her position deepened. Without saying a word, Catherine had won the people's hearts in ways that Camilla never fully could. Her role in William's breaking point was also profound. When he paced late into the night, consumed by thoughts of action and consequence, it was Catherine who steadied him. She reminded him of his mother's pain, yes, but she also reminded him of his own strength. "You are not your father," she whispered one evening, when he doubted himself. You are not bound to repeat his mistakes. You can choose differently. You can choose her. That reassurance gave William clarity. It allowed him to see that his decision was not an act of rebellion, but an act of love. It framed his choice not as an attack on the monarchy, but as a defense of its future. And that perspective, born of Catherine's quiet wisdom, became the foundation for everything that followed. Behind the scenes, Catherine also managed relationships with key allies. Courtiers who respected her integrity became more vocal in supporting William's position. Advisors who might have urged caution found themselves softened by Catherine's conviction. Even within the extended family, Catherine's diplomacy earned her silent nods of agreement. She was not confrontational, but her influence was undeniable. She built consensus not through force, but through example, showing that the true strength of the monarchy lay not in titles or crowns, but in the way it cared for its most vulnerable members. And in this case, that meant protecting Charlotte. The public narrative of Catherine's role was less visible, but no less important. While tabloids speculated about tension between William and Camilla, they rarely found fault with Catherine. Her image as the devoted mother and dutiful princess insulated her from criticism. This allowed her to operate with a freedom that others in the family did not have. She could subtly oppose Camilla's overreach without drawing direct fire. She could stand beside her daughter with protective resolve and be praised for it rather than condemned. This was her silent strength. The ability to fight battles without appearing to fight at all. As the crisis deepened, Catherine's presence became William's greatest source of resolve. He knew that whatever decision he made, she would stand with him. He knew that she shared his outrage, his fear, his determination. And he knew that she was willing to endure the consequences, no matter how severe. Together, they had built a family defined not by palace protocol, but by love and trust. And together, they would defend that family against anyone who threatened it, even if that person wore a crown. By the end of this chapter, Catherine's silent strength has become impossible to ignore. Though she never raised her voice, though she never issued demands, her influence is woven through every step of William's journey. She is the anchor that keeps him steady, the compass that points him toward what truly matters, the shield that guards Charlotte from harm. Her role is not flashy, but it is decisive. Without her, William might have faltered, torn between loyalty and fear. With her, he finds the courage to move forward. And as the storm gathers on the horizon, Catherine stands ready, not with swords or proclamations, but with the unshakable strength of a mother who will not allow her child to be used. When the rift between William and Camilla widened beyond repair, its tremors were felt not only in whispered exchanges between the family, but in the very foundations of the palace itself. For centuries, the British monarchy had endured internal conflicts, but it survived because those conflicts rarely escaped the confines of its gilded walls. This time was different. The struggle between the heir to the throne and the queen consort was not just personal, it was institutional. It created invisible lines within the royal household, dividing staff, advisors, and even members of the family into factions. It was no longer simply a disagreement. It was a cold civil war played out in the heart of Buckingham Palace. At first, the division manifested in subtle ways. Courtiers who had once worked seamlessly together began to whisper among themselves, choosing their loyalties carefully. Some, particularly those who had long served Charles and Camilla, believed William was being reckless, allowing personal grievances to cloud his judgment. They argued that Camilla had fought too hard to win her place, had endured decades of scorn, and had finally earned legitimacy through her marriage to Charles. To strip her of the title of queen consort would not only dishonor Charles, but destabilize the monarchy in the eyes of the public. These loyalists rallied quietly around Camilla, offering her reassurance, drafting statements that emphasized her dignity, and preparing for the storm they sensed was coming. On the other side were those who had pledged their careers to William and Catherine, the younger generation who saw the future of the monarchy in their hands. They viewed William's anger not as recklessness, but as resolve. To them, Camilla's actions toward Charlotte were unforgivable, a sign of the very old-world royal politics that William had promised to leave behind. They spoke in hushed tones of a new monarchy defined not by titles and traditions, but by empathy and accountability. In their eyes, supporting William was not just about loyalty to a person, but about loyalty to the future of the crown itself. The division extended into the household routines. Staff assignments became political statements. Those reassigned to work closer with William and Catherine were seen as aligning themselves with the heir, while those who remained in Camilla's circle were viewed as her defenders. Even in mundane tasks, like organizing events or drafting correspondence, the fracture showed. Invitations were scrutinized for hidden meanings, seating arrangements debated for hours to avoid awkward optics. What once ran like a well-oiled machine now sputtered with mistrust and suspicion. Family gatherings became unbearable. At one dinner hosted at Clarence's house, Charles attempted to maintain civility by seating William across from Camilla, believing physical distance would ease tension. Instead, it created a chilling tableau. The heir and the queen consort exchanging only the bare minimum of words, their silence louder than any argument. Catherine attempted small talk. George and Charlotte remained quiet under the weight of the atmosphere, and Charles forced cheer into his voice that fooled no one. Those present left the table shaken, sensing that the monarchy was cracking before their eyes. The ripple effect spread to extended members of the family as well. Princess, Anne, pragmatic and fiercely loyal to duty, was said to have urged William to temper his anger, warning him that public fracture could damage the crown irreparably. Prince Edward, ever cautious, avoided choosing sides openly, but expressed sympathy with Catherine's protective instincts. The younger royals, Beatrice and Eugenie, watched the drama with wary eyes, aware that their own positions in the monarchy had always been precarious. For them, siding openly with either Camilla or William could determine whether they were embraced or cast further into the margins of royal life. Beyond the palace walls, the media began to sense blood in the water. Reporters who covered the royals noticed the widening gulf between William and Camilla in public appearances. Analysts pointed out how William no longer looked toward her during ceremonies, how Catherine positioned herself protectively beside Charlotte whenever Camilla drew near. Though no one dared state outright what was happening, headlines began to hint at a division in the royal court. Tabloid speculation fanned the flames, with some stories portraying William as a hot-headed heir undermining his father, and others painting Camilla as manipulative, unable to relinquish control. The narrative war had begun, and once unleashed, it could not be controlled. Inside the palace, history loomed like a specter. Advisors recalled the abdication crisis of 1936, when Edward VIII chose Wallis Simpson over the crown, dividing the family and shaking the monarchy to its core. Others remembered the bitter feud between George VI and his brother, or the endless turmoil between Charles and Diana that had scarred the institution in the 1990s. Each time, the monarchy had survived, but each crisis left lasting scars. Now, with William and Camilla at odds, some feared that another wound was about to be carved into the monarchy's legacy. The most difficult position of all was Charles's. As king, he was meant to embody stability. As husband, he was bound to defend Camilla. As father, he longed to keep William close. Yet these roles clashed in ways that left him paralyzed. Behind closed doors, he pleaded with William to find compromise. He reminded him that the monarchy had always required sacrifice, that no family could afford to air its divisions so publicly. But William's response was uncompromising. "I will sacrifice myself for the crown," he told his father, "but I will never sacrifice my daughter." Those words hung heavy in the air, leaving Charles torn between empathy and exasperation. Meanwhile, Camilla herself became more defiant. The humiliation of being challenged by her stepson only hardened her resolve. She surrounded herself with loyal allies, insisting that she had done nothing wrong, that her attempts to involve Charlotte and Gus were simply acts of family unity. In private, she seethed at the thought of being cast once again as the villain in royal drama, after spending decades clawing her way to legitimacy. "I will not be erased," she reportedly told a close friend. "Not after everything I've endured." Her determination to hold her ground only deepened William's resolve to push her out. As the palace divided, the weight of history pressed harder on everyone involved. This was no longer a private squabble, but a battle for the soul of the monarchy. Was it an institution willing to repeat the mistakes of the past, sacrificing children and truth for the sake of appearances? Or was it an institution ready to evolve, to put family before facade? The answer, it seemed, would depend on William's next move, and whether he could muster the courage to confront not just Camilla but the entire structure that protected her. By the end of this chapter, the palace stands fractured. Factions have formed, loyalties have been tested, and the once unified facade of the monarchy is cracking. The heir and the queen consort are no longer just adversaries in private. Their conflict is shaping the very course of the crown's future. The palace, once the symbol of unity, has become a battlefield where every glance, every silence, and every whispered word carries the weight of history. And at the center of it all is a child, a father, and a queen consort whose determination has set the stage for a showdown that will rock the monarchy to its core. If there is one force the monarchy has never been able to control completely, it is the press. The institution may command centuries of tradition and the loyalty of nations, but the media has always held the power to shape public perception in ways that can either uphold or dismantle the crown's image. When the tension between William and Camilla began to seep out of the palace walls, it did not trickle, it erupted. The press smelled scandal, and like sharks circling blood, they descended with ferocity. What had begun as whispers of discomfort soon became a full-blown firestorm, consuming headlines, television panels, and online discussions across the world. At first, the story broke subtly. A few tabloids published articles hinting at strained relations between the Prince of Wales and the Queen Consort. Body language experts were called upon to analyze photographs, pointing out William's rigid posture beside Camilla, or the way Catherine positioned herself as a barrier between Charlotte and her step-grandmother. Online forums filled with speculation. Was Charlotte uncomfortable around Camilla? Was William harboring resentment that had never truly healed? These questions spread like wildfire, gaining traction not just in Britain but internationally, where fascination with royal drama is perennial. The media thrives on narrative, and here, it found the perfect storm. The players were familiar, almost archetypal. The dutiful son haunted by his mother's memory, the controversial stepmother who had fought her way into legitimacy, the innocent child caught between them. Every detail became fuel for speculation. A glance here, a missed smile there, a refusal to sit together at a public event. It was all dissected endlessly on morning shows and in glossy magazines. Even when the palace refused to comment, their silence was treated as confirmation that something monumental was unfolding behind the scenes. Social media amplified the firestorm. Hashtags trended within hours, with users posting side-by-side images of Diana and Charlotte, drawing comparisons between past and present. Some accused Camilla of repeating the sins of the past, exploiting the younger royals for appearances. Others argued that William was overreacting, allowing old wounds to dictate his judgment. Memes circulated, satire shows pounced on the drama, and suddenly, the monarchy was no longer the image of timeless stability, but the centerpiece of a modern-day soap opera broadcast in real time. What made the media frenzy even more intense was the fact that it touched on one of the monarchy's most sensitive nerves: children. Public sympathy for William and Catherine's protective parenting style was overwhelming. The idea that Charlotte might have been pushed into uncomfortable situations struck a chord with parents everywhere. Commentators on talk shows emphasized the importance of safeguarding children, even within royal families. Editorials in respected newspapers questioned whether the crown had learned nothing from the tragedies of the past. The more the story grew, the more public opinion seemed to align with William. Protecting his daughter, even against a queen consort, was framed as not only understandable but admirable. For Camilla, the firestorm was brutal. The decades she had spent rehabilitating her image were suddenly under threat. Old wounds reopened in the press. Headlines revisited the scandal of Charles and Diana, rehashing the affair, the divorce, and the years when Camilla was branded the most hated woman in Britain. Even outlets that had once softened their stance began to question whether she had overstepped in her dealings with Charlotte. Photographs of the retreat incident circulated online with captions accusing her of insensitivity, manipulation, even cruelty. Though her supporters insisted the moment had been taken out of context, the damage was done. The queen consort was once again cast as the villain, her reputation scorched by the blaze of media speculation. Inside the palace, The media firestorm created panic. Staff scrambled to manage the fallout, drafting statements that emphasized unity and family love. Charles's press team worked tirelessly to redirect attention toward his charitable work and state duties, hoping to drown out the scandal with positive coverage. William's team, however, adopted a different strategy. They remained quiet, refusing to deny the allegations, but also refusing to confirm them. This silence fueled speculation even further, but it also served a purpose. It allowed the public to project their sympathies onto William without interference. In the war of narratives, Camilla was forced to defend herself, while William appeared above the fray, the strong and silent protector of his daughter. Television networks seized on the opportunity. Primetime specials were dedicated to analyzing the rift, complete with dramatic voiceovers and archival footage of Diana's interviews. Documentaries hastily assembled by production houses re-examined the history of the Charles-Camilla-Diana triangle, positioning William's conflict with Camilla as the sequel to a saga decades in the making. The narrative was irresistible, history repeating itself, the sins of the past echoing into the present. For the media, it was ratings gold. For the monarchy, it was disaster. Public opinion polls reflected the damage. Surveys showed a sharp decline in support for Camilla's role as queen consort, while William and Catherine's approval ratings soared. People admired William's perceived courage to stand up for his child, even at the risk of family conflict. Catherine was praised for her protective instincts and her calm presence beside Charlotte. For many, the contrast between Catherine's silent grace and Camilla's perceived insensitivity could not have been starker. The story had crystallized into a morality play, with clear heroes and villains in the eyes of the public. But the firestorm also carried deeper consequences. Foreign media outlets, particularly in the United States, began questioning the stability of the monarchy itself. Commentators speculated on what it would mean if William truly attempted to strip Camilla of her title. Constitutional experts were brought onto panels to discuss whether such a move was even possible under current law. Some argued it could ignite a constitutional crisis, while others believed it was within the heir's power to reshape the monarchy once he ascended the throne. The debate spilled beyond palace drama into questions of governance, legitimacy, and the future of the crown. Meanwhile, Camilla herself grew increasingly isolated. Friends reported that she felt betrayed, that after years of service and dedication, she was once again being scapegoated. She railed privately against the press, blaming them for twisting harmless family moments into sinister narratives. Yet even her closest confidants admitted that her insistence on including her grandchildren in royal optics had been poorly judged. The firestorm left her vulnerable, her authority undermined, her legitimacy questioned more fiercely than at any point since her marriage to Charles. William, however, found himself emboldened. The media, which had so often hounded his family, now seemed to be on his side. Commentators framed him as a modern father unwilling to sacrifice his child to the demands of protocol. The firestorm gave him cover to act. If he moved against Camilla, he would not be seen as a vengeful stepson, but as a protector of the monarchy's future. The public narrative had shifted decisively in his favor, and he knew it. By the end of this chapter, the media firestorm had done what William alone could not. It turned private pain into public pressure. The palace was no longer able to contain the story. The world was watching, demanding answers, speculating on outcomes. Camilla's decades of image repair had unraveled in a matter of weeks, while William's resolve had hardened under the glare of sympathy and support. The monarchy, once again, was defined not by crowns or ceremonies, but by scandal, played out across television screens, newspapers, and social media feeds. And as the flames of controversy burned hotter, one question lingered in the air. How far would William go to protect his daughter, and what price would the crown pay when he did? By the time the media storm reached its peak, William knew he could no longer rely solely on instinct and outrage. If he was to move against Camilla, he would need more than private fury. He would need strategy, counsel, and a plan that could withstand the scrutiny of both the public and the crown. The decision to strip the queen consort of her title was unprecedented in modern times. It could not be made impulsively. And so, in the shadowed rooms of Kensington Palace and other discreet venues, William began a series of secret meetings that would shape the course of his next move. The first of these meetings was with his closest advisors, men and women who had been with him since his earliest days as Duke of Cambridge. They had seen him grow into his role as heir, witnessed his struggles with the press, and admired his steady hand in moments of crisis. Yet even they were unprepared for the intensity of his resolve now. He laid out the facts with calm precision. Charlotte's discomfort, Camilla's disregard, the symbolism of what had occurred, the potential damage to the monarchy's credibility. His advisors listened in silence, their faces grave. When he finished, one of them finally spoke. "Your Royal Highness, this is not just about family. This is about the crown itself." William nodded. He knew it already. That was why he could not back down. But advisors alone were not enough. William sought the wisdom of constitutional experts, legal minds who understood the intricacies of royal precedent. Could a queen consort be stripped of her title without abdication, divorce, or scandal of her own making? The answers were complicated. The monarchy operated as much on tradition as on law, and the traditions surrounding consort titles were murky. In theory, the king had granted Camilla the title. In practice, the heir could challenge its legitimacy if it was deemed harmful to the monarchy's survival. One scholar reminded William of the delicate balance between perception and authority. "If the people support you, the crown follows," he said. "But if you act without their support, you risk tearing the institution apart." The words lingered in William's mind long after the meeting ended. He also turned to trusted family allies. Princess Anne, practical and blunt, met with him privately one evening. She did not mince words. "You must be sure," she told him. "If you act, there's no going back. Camilla will fight, father will resist, and the press will feast on the fallout. But if you believe it's the only way to protect Charlotte, then act. Don't hesitate." Her words, though not an endorsement, carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom, and had seen every crisis the family had endured, and she knew the cost of indecision. In contrast, his conversations with Prince Edward were gentler, more cautious. Edward urged William to consider the long game, to think about how history would judge his actions. "You will be king one day," Edward reminded him. "What you do now will define not just this moment, but your reign. Ask yourself, do you want to be remembered as the heir who fractured the monarchy or the father who saved it?" The question cut deep. William knew the answer instinctively. He wanted to be remembered as both protector and reformer. But achieving both would require precision. Perhaps the most poignant of these secret meetings was not with an advisor or a royal, but with Catherine late at night in their private quarters. These were not formal councils, but intimate conversations where William bared his doubts. "What if I destroy everything?" he asked her once. Catherine, steady as always, met his gaze. "Then you rebuild it," she replied. "But you do not destroy your daughter. That is the one thing you cannot undo." Her words anchored him. They reminded him that his fight was not about titles or optics. It was about Charlotte's right to grow up free from manipulation. The secrecy of these meetings was paramount. William knew that if word leaked too early, Camilla's allies would mount a defense before he was ready. Courtiers arranged for discreet gatherings under the cover of routine business. Trusted staff cleared rooms of recording devices and ensured that only loyal aides were present. Even so, William moved carefully, aware that in the palace, walls had ears and whispers traveled faster than the wind. As these meetings unfolded, William's strategy began to take shape. It was not enough to accuse Camilla of misconduct. He needed a narrative that framed his actions as necessary for the crown's survival. He needed the public firmly on his side, ready to see him not as a rebellious son, but as a father defending the future queen. The media firestorm had already tilted sentiment in his favor. Now, he needed to harness it, to transform sympathy into legitimacy. Every advisor agreed on one thing: timing would be everything. Strike too soon, and he would be accused of acting rashly. Wait too long, and the moment would pass, leaving Camilla entrenched. Meanwhile, Camilla herself was not blind to what was happening. Reports reached her of William's private consultations, of the growing number of allies he was drawing into his circle. She responded with her own meetings, summoning loyalists to strategize. But while she had the advantage of being queen consort, William had the advantage of being the future. In every discussion, the same truth became clear: The public would side with the heir over the consort, especially when a child's dignity was at stake. Camilla could defend herself, but she could not erase the image of Charlotte's discomfort. It haunted every article, every broadcast, every conversation about the crisis. William's secret meetings also delved into the practicalities of what came next. If he moved against Camilla, how would it be announced? Through the press? Through a formal statement? Through a private confrontation with his father first? Each option carried risks. A public announcement without Charles's knowledge would humiliate the king and fracture their bond irreparably. A private confrontation risked Charles siding with his wife, leaving William isolated. The question of how to act weighed as heavily as the decision to act itself. Yet in each meeting, as the arguments swirled, William returned to the same point. Charlotte must be protected. That conviction overrode every fear, every hesitation. By the end of this chapter, the image of William is not of a man consumed by anger, but of a leader preparing for battle. His secret meetings are the forge where his plan is shaped, where his allies are rallied, and where his resolve hardens into action. The heir to the throne, once cautious and conciliatory, now stands ready to confront the queen consort herself, armed not only with fury but with strategy. The palace may be divided, the media ablaze, the risks immense, but William has made his choice. The time for patience has ended. The time for action is drawing near.